Kamala's problems, I think, is she already won the debate on who is the better person. She was. People would say she's the better person, but she's incompetent, or they don't like her policies, or whatever it was. But as far as a better person, Kamala won hands down.
Hey, Mark, thanks for joining us again on PI Talks Politics. Really appreciate it. We have a ton to unpack. I'm going to let you start off. What the hell happened?
Good morning, Carmen. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, one of the ways to look at this is I was thinking about why Alyssa Slotkin won, right? Because in Michigan,
okay.
and Michigan is a great test case because Harris lost Michigan, which meant there were a lot of split votes for Alyssa Slotkin.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at her campaign, I thought she did everything right. I thought she was running a wonderful campaign. And I thought last week that it was the Harris campaign and the Democratic Party that was bringing her down. And one of the key things that she did this entire time was, first of all, her campaign manager up here was both rural. He was born on a farm and he was in the U.S. Air Force. So he was military. And she talked about farm and military all the time. She also had events up here. And my great great uncle hosted one of them here in Boone. And when they asked me if I knew somebody with a farm who would do that, my first reaction was yes, but I don't want to do an event for Democrats to come to Boone, because I don't really see that moving the needle at all. And 80% of the people here are Republicans. But if you'd like to come and talk with a bunch of Republicans, I'd be happy to go around and invite them to this event. And they said, sure. She's happy to talk to them. And in fact, her message, you wouldn't know if she was a Republican or a Democrat. And I just thought she did very, very well. And she knocked the ball out of the park with the Michigan Farm Bureau, which didn't endorse her, but that was a sort of a punishment for being pro-abortion. The people who heard her speech did like her. They did think that she was very pro-farm. And a lot of my cousins are in that group as well, and sort of bigger farmers. And I am sure there were a lot of split votes in that group as well. Who
so you
didn't
mentioned
vote
in your
for Harris, they voted for Trump, but they voted for it. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you mentioned in your new column at postindustrial.com a lot of those concerns that you were just voicing that are coming from farmers about
Yes.
Harris agenda and the things that the Harris campaign did not address, and that as it pertains to regulatory restrictions on farming, things that deal with EVs.
Yes.
Speak to that a little bit, because I think people need to know more as to why rural voters decided to, in many cases, hold their nose and vote for Trump.
Sure.
Because you mentioned the fact that a lot of them know that he's a reprehensible human being, but
all of them know that.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
All of them know that. Right. All of them know that. And that was one of Kamala's problems, I think, is she already won the debate on who is the better person. She was. People would say she's the better person, but she's incompetent, or they don't like her policies, or whatever it was. But as far as a better person, Kamala won hands down. So when she started pointing out over and over again how bad Trump was, I thought, you're not moving the needle, because they already know that. You've already won that battle, and you're relitigating that thing. But anyway, back to your question, which is on the regulatory stuff. This is a book that is circulating again. A farmer gave it to me to read, and it's called Everything I Want to Do is Illegal. And what's cute about the book, it's from 2007, but you see that, I don't know if you can see the tank. It says USDA on it.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So tell us.
Because
this speaks to the farming mentality. Okay, tell me.
Yes. Because it's become, especially under the Biden administration, and it changes in administrations, but it became it's a consumer protection administration out to get the farmer. That's the perception. And I've seen personally a lot of the things that this guy writes about in here. There's a lot of stuff that the USDA does, which is really geared toward the large sort of processing company, not the small farmer. And the processors are always trying to get the USDA, they'll say, we want a level playing field. So if we need to build $1 million facility to process bacon, we want Joe to do it too. And that's one of the things that's set up right now. If you wanted to do 1 pound of bacon, which is an old legacy. For thousands of years we've had that. You would have to build a facility. You'd have to have refrigerated trucks to move it around. I mean, it would be hugely expensive to do it. If you have volume, you can do it. A lot of things in there like that are they just don't make sense on the small farm. My neighbor had to get a porta potty put on the farm because that's one of the new requirements. And I can tell you, nowhere where I live is going to jump off their tractor and run to a porta potty to take a leak. That's just not what's going to happen. So it's just $800 that he wasted, and he put it right on the road so that the USDA inspector can see it, that he has this porta potty and no one uses it. It's just a waste of money. Why are we doing this? So I don't know if are you familiar with Justice Gorsuch's new book, Overruled?
No,
that Supreme Court Justice just wrote.
No, I didn't see that.
He just wrote a book. Yes, and which I read. It's called Overruled, and he talks about this kind of over-regulation, which Trump talks about when he's talking about the deep state. That's what he's really getting to, is that there's this level of regulation that is down there that is bothering all of us. And I call this little r regulation, not big R. Big R is clean air and clean water. And for big R, you have well-funded lobbyists and corporations fighting that all the time. And there's a battle going, and it ends up wherever. On little r, there's no one fighting it. And it's something like 75% of rulemaking, they don't receive a single public comment because no one knows about it. There's no lobby. It just gets enacted, and then you have to deal with it. So the Justice's book, which I thought was very, very good, is about, for example, he talks about the magician's rabbit. The magician had a rabbit, and after the last hurricane or last disaster, USDA said, well, all sort of work animals have to have an evacuation plan. So they required him to draft an evacuation plan for his magician's rabbit who lives in a cage. And then
okay,
and then
that's
they had
over
to have
the top. I get it. It's over the top. It's too much regulation.
Over
And this is
the top.
Yeah.
Over
we
the
keep
top,
hearing
right.
about this over and over again in the post-mortem
Yes.
now.
Yes.
Because we're in the who to blame phase, right? That's what
Yes, we
Democrats
are.
are in. They're in that
Right.
who to blame phase. And
Right.
how would you address the fact that 13 million fewer people came out to vote for Kamala than did Biden in this past election? She got 13 million fewer votes than Biden did. And Trump got about the same number of votes as he did last time, which I'm going to say is probably an increase because back in 2020, 2021, a lot of people who were Trump supporters were more often than those that weren't were dying of COVID. So I think that you would actually have fewer people that previously voted for him that were alive, but he built that coalition to include Black men, Latino men, and young men of all races. So how did he do that?
How did Trump do that?
How did he do that?
Yeah.
In your neck of the woods, how did he manage to pull that off?
Well, he pulled that off because he focused on, well, first of all, he had an amazing rural outreach program, and we can talk about that a little bit. There was zero from the Democrats, zero. So I have right here, this is what I received on Monday. In the mail. And for the last 10 days, I've been getting, this is just Monday. I was getting this every day. 8 of them are Republican to vote for Trump. Okay. And it does move the needle. When you start getting this stuff, you think, oh, they really do value me. So that 8 from him, none to me. There was 1 to my daughter, and my daughter, it was the one for Kamala, right? So 1 on here. Okay. Not only that, I have 2 phone numbers. He had both of my phone numbers, and I would get calls from the Trump campaign, personal calls with a human on the other side. Twice were for his what you call them, virtual town halls or whatever it was. They'd say, hey, Mr. Yonkman, we've got President Trump coming on. Can you please hold? That's an amazing personal touch. I mean, that moves people's needle. Yeah. I also got emails from them, and the emails weren't, I want money. The emails were, I want you to vote for me, and this is why. I did get emails from Kamala Harris, but it was, I want money. We need more money. And we just met with the Democratic Party here today, and we all said none of us are going to give her money. She has $1 billion and they're not spending any money in rural America, why are we going to give you more money to spend, in Detroit? That's just not going to happen. So, I think that's what drove that turnout, because there was zero outreach in rural Michigan from Democrats and enormous outreach by Republicans and data mining. Somebody was behind all of this because they got all of my information. And having said that, I'm a registered Democrat. I was a delegate to the Michigan Democratic Convention, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm registered with the Wexford County, and nothing from the Democrats. That's not good outreach. Their ground game needs to change dramatically.
I totally agree with you. As someone who grew up in rural post-industrial America, I can tell you that that outreach in Pennsylvania obviously failed. Michigan, Wisconsin, obviously, lost all three. But along those same lines, I feel like Democrats have already thrown up their hands years ago over Ohio, saying, we lost Ohio. As long as we can keep the big wall and the Democratic wall and those three states and the other reliables will be fine. But they not addressing those issues in rural Michigan, rural Wisconsin, rural Ohio, rural Pennsylvania is what definitely cost them in this election. And talking about issues pertaining to, even if Kamala wasn't talking about them, even if it wasn't something that she had brought up in years, or anyone had brought up in years, the whole notion of defund the police. You're right. That stuck with folks and stayed with them, even though Biden was able to overcome it. Kamala was not. No, and that speaks to a lot about race and gender as well. I don't know how you feel about that, but I definitely think race and gender do come into this as well.
Well, who am I to say? But having said that, I did point out in my article, we have elected, in fact, a Black president, and we did elect a female president because she won the popular vote. And I think if she had really thought about it and ran for the Electoral College vote, she could have won that too. But she didn't run for that at all. She had no one on her staff with any sort of rural background. And I read an article about how a week before the election, she decided to hire somebody. Well, Kamala should have learned from that. And she had, Kamala had no one from Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin from a rural era on her staff. You need to look like your voters a little bit. And I said this about the military too. You saw my comment. If you're running as commander in chief and the military, I looked it up, it was 83% male. You probably should have some male military people on your staff someplace, because you can't understand all the ins and outs of that. If I told you that I had been to Afghanistan, you would see through that in 5 minutes, right? Well, 5 seconds probably, right? And you would know things that I don't know. I could try to put up a good show, but I'm not going to know what you know. And not having people on our staff, that's a mistake, because you can't catch everything. You can't study everything. You can't. A lot of it is real time. So I have dozens of examples of poor messaging to rural people, and you can tell that there was no one on her staff looking at this with that lens, and it cost her. Biden had a better way of talking about it.
Yeah. And I'm not a huge fan of his, particularly as of late, but Senator Fetterman, when he was seeking the office, did a really smart thing. He went to every single county in Pennsylvania and held an event in every single county. Counties he knows he would never win outright, but he made his presence known there. Now, Kamala couldn't have gone to every single county in every single swing state, but what she could have done is gone to a few counties in deep red territories and talked to people, not making a big event about it, just showing up someplace and talking to folks. That would have resonated, but she was not comfortable with that. I don't think she was ready to get caught off guard. Yeah.
Two things. That is what Alyssa Slotkin did, including going to the UP, which, there's a handful of votes up there, and it's all red, and they went up there. But also, last time around, Trump came to my community, this little tiny, a handful of votes community, and they're still talking about it. I still hear people say, oh, you remember Trump came here, we're really important to him, but nothing from Kamala Harris. So I agree with you completely. You need to get out there because people talk. And especially when you talk to farmers, they know a lot of people, and there aren't a lot of farmers, but I think that connection is huge. It's much different than talking to somebody who's living, in the back and, working at Kmart or something. So I think that was a mistake of hers as well.
And she had the money to do it. Yeah, she had the money, and a lot of that money was spent. I think that the Democrats are going to go back, and part of their postmortem is going to be, okay, we raised $1 billion. How are we not more effective at after 107 days? People are still Googling who replaced Joe Biden, because that was one of the big Google searches. Who replaced Joe Biden in this election? People were still looking up her name. Now, what does that speak to? That speaks to the ineffective way in which they spent some of that money.
Mm-hmm.
But it also speaks to, like you said, Kamala not speaking to people where they are on issues that are important to them.
Right.
And speaking to them where they are is not just going to places like Boone County, where you're from in Michigan, or Westmoreland County, where I'm from in Western Pennsylvania, but addressing these people where they exist a lot. And that's in the right-wing media ecosphere, which is the podcast spheres, the Ben Shapiro's, the Joe Rogans, Theo Vaughn's. She didn't do any of that. She didn't meet any of the people where they are. And those are the folks that helped flip this race. I'm convinced of that.
Yes.
Those are the folks that helped get some of those Latino men, Black men, and young men of all stripes to the polls.
Yes. Yes.
And there's just nothing on that the Democrats. I heard Democrats lamenting this fact today on Pod Save America. Those guys, well, we don't have anything on the left like Joe Rogan is, and but they were also cognizant enough to know that Joe Rogan just wasn't created in some GOP lab. He has a long career in television, both as a host and as a character actor, and then went on to do this very successful podcast, which is then, parlayed itself into being a political kingmaker of sorts. So, there are, I noticed that Kamala didn't even go on Pod Save America, or she went on a handful of other podcasts, but nothing that would really find people where they are and to galvanize those voters who definitely stayed home on her. There were. Let me ask you this before I tell you how I feel. Do you really think that there are more Trump supporters in America than there are Kamala supporters?
Well, I think the answer is yes, and I think that none of the vast majority of them don't really like Trump, but he's talking to them because he figures out somehow exactly what makes you tick, and then he speaks to it. He might not do anything about it, but he acknowledges it, and that's such a big part of this. And one of the things I heard constantly, especially towards the end, where I think her authenticity cratered, is people were waiting for her to say, for example, the question, how many people came across the border during your administration? You should know the answer to that. That seems like a basic question. And what we got was, I was middle class and I had a nice lawn and this sort of word salad because you didn't want to answer it. And people forgive that stuff. And I heard over and over, all I wanted her to do was to say, it was 9 million people and that will not happen under my watch. That's it. And move on. And she wouldn't do it. And it just lost her the authenticity vote. And this trying to protect, I assume it's trying to protect Biden.
It was.
I think, if you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs because that just wasn't the right thing to do. It really turned people off when she started doing that. And one of the things that I found that was successful is a couple of people would ask me, well, are you going to vote for Trump or, Kamala? Because they get suspicious, am I really on the Trump team or which team am I on? And I'd say Trump is too old. I don't think he's going to make it. He's, almost 80. He's like the same age as Biden, and he's failing. I think he is. And that resonated with people. They're like, well, that's actually okay. I don't know that I agree with you, but if that's what you think, that's a good reason not to vote for him. So why wasn't Kamala ever leaning into that at all? And I think she should have. For example, when she mispronounced her name, I would have said, well, at his age, it's hard to learn new pronunciations. You could have flipped that script on him all the time. And she wouldn't do it, I think, again, because of Biden. I think it dragged her down. She didn't want to make it sound like, he's too old too. And my response would be, if you wanted to win, you needed to do that. And she didn't.
A lot of that post-mortem discussion does revolve around Biden should have never run for re-election, especially after the 2022. He could have gone out on the high note and said, look, this is, I said I was going to be a change candidate. But as I lament about dangerous old white, but as I lament about dangerous old white dudes like Trump, the same goes for Biden. They get to a certain age and they stop giving any fucks about anything other than their legacy, and they lose all perspective.
That's true.
They totally lost perspective. When you get to a certain age, when you're beyond, for men it's like 65 or older. Then we get to this point where we're just thinking about our legacy so much and how people perceive us and how we're going to be perceived into the future that we lose perspective on the bigger picture. And I think that's what happened with Biden. I think that he completely lost perspective on the fact that he promised to be this transitional candidate, and people elected him as a transitional candidate. And if he had said, look, I got the country moving in the right direction after Trump's disastrous handling of COVID. Yes, prices are still too high, but we're working on that. And Kamala is going to complete the work. She's going to help us get there. I couldn't finish it. She can. I think that would have gone a long way. Do you think that would have helped?
I do too. I think that absolutely would have helped. But it's hard to look back on that because I think there would have been so much demand for a primary to have other candidates step up.
And there should have been one.
And there probably should have been one. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I still think that Josh Shapiro and Pete Buttigieg would have won. I think that would have been a great team. I've always thought that. I still think that. I don't think it was in either one of their interests to throw their hat in. Not with the way it happened because there wasn't enough time, but that would have been a good team. And talk about diversity, a Jew and a gay man.
A Jew and a gay man. Okay. But playing devil's advocate, the day after Kamala loses, the day after Kamala loses, we get a rash of text messages going out across the country to young black men saying, report to the nearest cotton field. Right. We've seen these kinds of messages. We've seen these kind of messages going out, and I'm wondering, and this speaks to the cold, dark, lonely feeling I have about America following this election that I need to get over because we all do. You wouldn't be worried about them saying, the Jew and the gay. I'm not voting for a Jew and a fag. Are you worried? Wouldn't you worry about that? I worry about that that type of America. No. I'm glad you feel that way. Tell me why.
I don't feel that way because so many of the young. Well, you're talking about a tiny little percentage of people that are driving those kinds of texts and things.
Okay.
I think because I don't see any of that. I don't see that where I live. I also don't wear all of this on my sleeve all the time. And a couple of points back before this all happened, I was telling a friend, nobody knows that Kamala Harris has a black father. Nobody knows that she's black. And they were like, what do you mean? Everybody knows that. I'm like, no, they don't. Most people don't know who the vice president is. How would they know what race she is? They don't even know who Kamala Harris is. Like you're crazy to think that. So when she first got tapped, I asked several people. I'm like, what do you think? What race do you think she is? And they'd say, oh, Filipino or Mexican or Latino and some of these were my wealthy, educated East Coast friends too, who would say, yeah, I thought she was Filipino, and I was like horrified to learn that she's myself to learn that she's actually, Indian, Eastern Indian, and Jamaican. So people didn't think that way. And one of the farmers I talked to, I said, well, yeah, her father is black. And he said, oh yeah, I can see that. It was so irrelevant to him. So irrelevant. Okay. Just, yeah, I can see that. And, my daughter's father is black, and she talks about it at township meetings. No one cares. And people say things like, yeah, isn't it nice that race isn't an issue anymore? And I know what they're trying to say. Racism is still out there. It always will be, right? But it's not an issue in the sense of a black person can't be your teacher anymore, or couldn't be right? In that sense, it isn't an issue. I mean, we have moved a long way. True. So I think that, and when I look at Alyssa Slotkin's campaign, no one ever talked about her being a woman. It just wasn't part of the campaign on either side. It just wasn't discussed. And I think that helped Alyssa a lot, because it focused everybody on her military experience and her farm background and her common sense approach, reaching across the aisle. She wasn't running as a woman, and it helped her. It was just a totally a non-issue. And I think Kamala's allies hurt her, not Kamala herself. I thought she did fine. She wasn't the one out there saying, she never said, I'm a black woman. She would say, my father's black, my mother's Eastern Indian. But I think the press and her allies hurt her a lot by focusing on it, because pretty soon people are like, oh, okay. And then Trump starts saying, oh, suddenly she's black, right? And that whole, that was sort of thrown on her. I thought that was very unfair to Kamala Harris. And that was not her fault. That was her allies' fault.
Yeah.
So,
well, we're going to have a lot to unpack. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to have a lot to unpack.
I'm more positive on this. I think I'm more positive on this than you.
Yeah, you are.
I also, I am. Yeah. But I also, I often travel around with, a black kid, and I just don't see all of the hate and bigotry everywhere all the time that I think some people do. And so I'm much more positive about that.
Well, it's good to know that the hatred and bigotry in America only exists in certain pockets, and it's not as pervasive as I thought it was, especially coming out of this election.
Well, and also there are people who bring it out of people, and you've seen that, and I've seen that, where, in fact, that happened to me this week. It was a great example of this. I was in Traverse City, which is the big town north of us, which we think is the big city. So it's, I think, 25,000 people. And I was shot. It was my daughter's birthday today.
Oh, happy birthday.
So I went to TJ Maxx and I got some things, and I'm checking out. And while I was there was one of the clerks was obviously gay man, and super gay, just everybody knew, and making sure, just being as, as gay as possible. And I was just kind of smiling.
Let me ask you something. As a straight man, am I allowed to identify people as being super gay? No,
you're not. No, you're not. No,
you're allowed to. Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, I'm allowed to, but you're not.
Sure. So, okay, just making sure.
So I go to check out, and I get him, and he's sort of, talking about something. And I said, oh, I was trying to be pleasant. I said, oh, this TJ Maxx is so much nicer than the one in Cadillac. And he said, oh, well, I opened that store and blah, 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 blah. And then I went to work for these two bars, which I'd never heard of. And I said, I've never heard of those bars. What are they? And he said, well, they're two gay bars in Cadillac. And my reaction was, there were gay bars in Cadillac. I missed that whole era. I was on the East Coast, but apparently they were. And I said, huh. And then I said, oh, I thought the only gay bar up here was Sidetracks in Traverse City. And that's when he realized, oh, this isn't a straight man. But he was sort of baiting me.
Yeah.
He was baiting me a little bit, because he thought I was just buying gifts from, I don't know. It just struck me as I would never have that conversation that he had. I would never, make a point of pointing out that I not only am I gay, but I worked at these two gay bars in Cadillac, and it just seemed untoward to me. And so, you know, I don't know. There are some people who bring it out. Another example, during the campaign, a woman came in to talk about the terrible Trump people that she bumped into, and we're like, "Oh, what happened?" And she said, "Well, I went into this bowling alley. I was going to rent it out for this event, and in the front yard there was this huge, you know, one of the huge Trump signs.
Right.
So I went in and told the guy, 'Hey, did you know that somebody put a Trump sign in front of your bowling alley?' And my reaction was, that's not what you say to someone. I mean, obviously it's his Trump sign, right? And she's being extra by doing this. And he ended up screaming at her. And, you know, we're sitting there thinking, you brought that on yourself. I mean, he did do some nasty things after that, but it was started by her. It was, you know, just one of those, she shouldn't have done it. He shouldn't have done what he did. He sent some nasty, you know, texts and emails, but it just wasn't a good story on either side. It was just, I don't use that as an example of how horrible Trump people are, because you instigated it. So, you know, there is that out there. Because I don't experience that, but I'm always, you know, I am always very respectful of any Trump voter, because these are my neighbors, and, you know, I know everyone, and I can't go around bashing their team or their candidate. You know, you'd be run out of town. You just can't do that. And so I think Democrats need to work on that a lot.
That's a good point, Mark. Let's stop baiting each other. Let's stop trying to antagonize each other. Let's all stop trying to own the libs or make the Republicans cry.
Right.
Let's all try to work together again in that kumbaya spirit that the founding fathers who owned slaves told us about. But yeah, you're right. We need to take that temperature down. We got to take that temperature down, and maybe figure out our way back towards a more normal, just in the aisles bickering on Capitol Hill, and not you know, body blows and worse down the road for the rest of the nation. It's going to be tough in the era of Trump.
I'm positive. I am more positive on that outlook than I think a lot of people, because I think one of the things that Trump did do is the abortion debate is going to be over now at the federal level. It's at the state level, and, you know, the next election cycle, it's just not going to be as divisive of an issue, because we've taken care of the division by localizing the division. So yeah, we're going to have some states where, you know, it's going to be terrible for women, but it's just going to be in those states. So I think that will change the dialogue, and you won't have these sort of punitive and revenge votes that you have right now. There are people who vote against the Democrats solely on that issue, and Trump has essentially removed that issue sometime in the next 4 years.
Good point. All right. On that note, let's bump out of here. We have a lot that we're going to be unpacking in the days and weeks to come, and you're going to come back on and help us figure it all out. All right. Appreciate it.
Okay, good. Thank you, Carmen. Good to be here.